Thank you for joining us again and welcome back to our channel. If this is your first time, we appreciate your time. In this episode, we are looking at global geopolitical competition that has hit the continent of Africa. The big question here is, can Africa maintain its voice? We shall be exploring this episode like never before seen. We will dive into specifics, bring you a compelling analysis as to the reason why the continent of Africa's voice is shrinking rapidly and the continent needs to do something about it. I will encourage you to watch this video to the end for clarity and better understanding. So without any much delay, let's just dive straight into it. A new wave of high-level visit to Africa shows the complicated strategic choices that the continent needs to make. The Russian invasion of Ukraine in February heightened pre-existing global geopolitical tension. Since June of 2022, high-level visits from Germany, Russia, France, and the United States of America to 13 African states illustrate the competition for Africa's hearts and minds. Renewed attention by global powers has raised concern about whether Africa can defend its interests while international relations are increasingly strained. African states must carefully consider their strategic choices and positions to prevent being drawn into global disputes.
We are now also witnessing Africa being dragged into conflicts far beyond our own borders. Some countries, including our own, are being threatened with penalties for pursuing an independent foreign policy and for adopting a position of non-alignment. As African countries, we have painful memories of a time when proxy wars were waged on the soils of Africa by foreign superpowers. We have not forgotten the terrible, brutal legacy of first having our own continent carved up and colonized by European countries, only to find ourselves once more being pawns on a chessboard during the Cold War. We are not going back to that history. We refuse to go back to that period in history as Africans.
The thing is, it appears to be a new scramble for Africa happening right before our own eyes. Africa is home to some of the world's fastest growing economies, despite a sharp economic decrease since the COVID-19 pandemic. Many experts have identified Africa as the next big frontier, as a global economic and political force. Thus, it is unsurprisingly that many global powers have turned their attention to the continent. The visits are aimed at creating new partnerships and addressing common mutual challenges. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz just visited past couple of months to Senegal, Niger, and also South Africa. Exemplifies some of those aims. It's focused on investment, energy, and food security issues, with a strong undertone of countering Russia's effort in Africa. German troops are deployed to the United Nations mission in Mali. After the departure of French troops in August, Germany became the main counter to the increasing role played by Russian paramilitary groups in supporting the Malian government. The visit of United States of America's Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, had similar goals to those of German, Americans, and also others. America is attempting to patch up its foreign policy towards Africa after the delay in relations during the Trump administration. Visiting South Africa, Rwanda, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Blinken used the trip to launch Sub-Saharan African strategy of the United States of America. This strategy is a sign of American efforts to rebuild relationships with the continent of Africa. In the United States policy circle, Africa is generally viewed as a backwater, peripheral to the United States economy and security priorities. The statue is reflected in the U.S. diplomacy. The last visit by a United States president to an African country was then President Barack Obama's trip to Ethiopia in 2015. Contrast this with President Joe Biden's trip to Europe, Asia, and the Middle East just during the first year of his administration. The US president was recently in Egypt, no doubt, but that was as a result of the climate change conference. Moving ahead, France is presented with some significant challenges in Africa, not without reasons. French President Emmanuel Macron's July tour to Cameroon, Benin, and Guinea-Bissau illustrate Paris' long-running ambitions to renew relationship with African continent. This renewed process has languished into some particular areas, exemplified by the Malian junta's critique of Macron's approach as neo-colonial and also patronizing with regards to his own perspective. The visit from Germany, the United States, and to some extent France has something in common. They all are looking to counter the increasing role played by Russia and China in the continent of Africa, particularly as the conflict in Ukraine continues and the tension over Taiwan remains momentum. Looking at other aspects, thus, Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov's trip to Egypt, the Republic of the Congo, Uganda, and Ethiopia in July is a symbolic one as well. The tour aimed to demonstrate that Russia has not been left isolated by the Western sanctions. He presented a narrative of Russia as a respectful friend rather than an overbearing Western power with a colonial mindset. Lavrov also attempted to counter the West narrative on the causes of the global food crisis, blaming sanctions rather than the Russian blockade of grain export from Ukraine into the Black Sea. Moving ahead, despite those efforts, global powers still have a long way to go to rebuild trust with African countries. We have made lots of videos on this particular channel. If you are new here, we encourage you to check the entire channel for you to see more exciting and educating content regards to the global African perspective. Without any more delay, let's just dive straight into it. During his lecture at the University of Pretoria, Blinken said Washington will not dictate which choices Africa must make, and neither should anyone else. However, the United States of America's Sub-Saharan African relationship strategy mentions that China and Russia's exploitation of African nations. These direct references targeting other external forces give the impression that the African continent is more the theater of operations than the focus itself, and that perception is valid for the United States and apparent in how other global powers have engaged with the continent of Africa. While the fact that global powers have their own strategies for Africa, when those restrict Africans' ability to negotiate a space in the world, it may diminish the continent's agencies. Some of those approaches already received some backlash. A proposed United States law, the Countering Malign Russian Activities in the African Act, seek to punish African countries that support any Russian activities that undermines United States objectives and interests. This proposed bill, yet to be discussed by the US Senate, has not gone unnoticed. The Southern African Development Community expressed dissatisfaction concerning Africa's being targeted for unilateral and punitive measures in a joint communique followed by the 42nd Heads of State of Southern African Development Community Summit, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, as of August. If you look into perspective regarding Africa needs a firm stand to figure out its voice regards to the global community. The intensifying competition between China and the United States and powers such as the European Union, United Kingdom, the UK as well, and also India, Turkey, and also Russia, all vying for greater influence across Africa, will likely have important consequences for peace, stability, democracy, human rights, and also the development across the continent. Africa's abundant gas and oil reserves could supplement Europe's need as it searches for alternatives to Russian gas, oil, and coal. Despite a push for a just transition from fossil fuel, African states could still seize opportunities to negotiate favorable carbon export agreements, diversifying and strengthening their external partnership. Senegalese President Macky Sall noted that fairer explorations and trade conditions are required if the country is to work on supplying gas to Europe. The West should go beyond rhetoric commitments and also change how it interacts with the continent of Africa. Many call Western approach hypocritical by demanding that African states take a stand in the European conflict, while many African crises remains overlooked and also under-supported. Moving ahead, several African leaders have asserted their will to remain neutral during this rush of the high-level visit. When Lavrov was in Uganda, President Yoweri Museveni questioned the demand that African countries should oppose particular states. He controversially said, "We want to make our own enemies, not fight other people's enemies." In a similar vein, South African Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, Naledi Pandor, asserted that South Africa will not be bullied to choose side or looking at other aspects with regards to the international pressure. The slew of high-level visits to Africans devoted with the continent, important as the largest regional voting bloc at the United Nations and a potential vital player in international relations and politics. The active non-aligned stance taken by many African states since the invasion of Ukraine signifies the continent's resistance to becoming embroiled into politics of confrontation, and also the power countries have to advance with regards to putting their own perspective ahead in terms of other nations. Nevertheless, more must be done indeed. African countries' commitment to active non-alignment is not any easy task to point out. The diversity within the continent means that unified positions are not always possible, but when individuals' positions are not clearer, it may create challenges as well.
And this, I will say it once again today, South Africa has not been and will not be drawn into a contest between global powers. We will maintain our position on the peaceful resolution of conflict wherever those conflicts occur. Guided by the lessons of our history, we will continue to resist calls to abandon our independent and non-aligned foreign policy.
The visit of South Africa's Defense Minister Thandi Modise to Moscow to attend 10th Conference Federation International Security that was in August of 2022 in the case in point why the country has continued to communicate its neutrality and non-alignment. This visit contradicted such narratives. Rather, it confirms for many in the West the view that South Africa has taken a side. Thus, governments must ensure their rationale clearly articulating those particular aspects, their intentions when exercising their agencies with external partners. Africa has the freedom to take advantage of the various external partnerships on offer. Nevertheless, in doing so, African nations should assert their interest so that the continent benefits from renewed attention. This can help prevent African states from being used by external powers to put their own interests ahead of the continent. Hopefully, we've informed you with regards to how strategic this particular period is with regards to geopolitics in the continent of Africa. Let us know what you think with regards to this particular aspect with regards to African voices at the moment, what the continent is facing so far based on your own analysis. Let us know if you are from one of those countries that geopolitics is so high in your region and how that's going to affect your region. Let us know in the comment section. Feel free to drop us a comment and watch some other very informative video on this YouTube channel. We are looking forward to meeting you soon in our next episode. Have a good day. Bye-bye.